Welcome back to my channel. In this video, let's discuss the Selenium automation interview questions and answers which are frequently asked in interviews. Okay, so I have uploaded this in PDF in a link that I mentioned in the description and also in the comment section. Please do check out. I repeat, I have uploaded this video in the description and also in the comment section. Please do check out. Okay, so let's get started. Uh, WebDriver is interface or class. WebDriver is an interface in Selenium. Why do we upcast driver to WebDriver interface? Okay, upcasting to WebDriver interface allows you to change the browser driver without changing the code that interacts with the driver, thus making your code more flexible and maintainable. Okay, guys, I'll just go with the questions. I have already provided the answer. You can explore more. Okay, if we do not add driver exe file, when what will happen and what kind of exception will be generated? Difference between close and quit. What's the difference between get and navigate.to? Difference between find element and find elements. How to get all links in current page? Which locator will you use other than the XPath? What are the methods of WebDriver? Who is the parent of WebDriver? How do you download or install WebDriver? Explain the steps. Can you explain the Selenium WebDriver architecture? Explain the Selenium Java client architecture. Can you explain the difference between get window and get window handles? How do you pass URI into the browser? What is the use of get current page source method? Difference between Selenium IDE, Selenium RC and WebDriver. How do you get the URL of the current web page? What's the difference between WebDriver driver equal to new Firefox driver and Firefox driver equal to new Firefox driver? Okay, do we use any constructor in WebDriver? Assume browser version is different and exe file version is different. What kind of exception will you get? How do you maximize and minimize the browser? Can you find the title of the page without using getTitle method? How do you capture screenshot for a failed test script? Can you write the syntax? When do we go for find elements method and what is the return type? What is illegal state exception? Why do we get it? Why do we get WebDriver exception? Does WebDriver have any constructor? What are the disadvantages of WebDriver? We have 4 tabs in the browser currently. I am in the parent tab. How do you switch into the 4th tab? What is web element? Is it a class or interface or an abstract class? What are the methods of web element? Why do we have find element and find elements method in the web element? Difference between click and submit. What is the use of clear method? How will you get text from web element? And how do you get the height and width of a web element? How will you get the location of a web element? How will you get my x and y coordinate of a web element? What's the purpose of using getRect method? How do you send data into the text field? How do you pass data into a text field without using send keys? How do you click on the web element without using click method? How will you check whether the element is displayed or not? How will you check whether the element is enabled or not? And similarly, how will you check whether the element is selected or not? How do you get all the links of the current web page? What is the return type of find elements method? Why do we have find element and find elements method on both WebDriver and web element? How to capture color, height, width and font size of an element? How to delete all the cookies? How will you handle disabled elements? How will you handle scroll up and scroll down web page? And how do you capture the screenshot of a web page? And the next set of interview questions are with respect to the synchronization in Selenium. What is a synchronization? How to handle synchronization wait available in WebDriver? Which wait statement will be used to wait until the page gets loaded? How to handle dynamic object? Difference between thread wait, implicit wait and explicitly wait. Do you have any idea of fluent wait? If yes, can you explain? If an element fails to load within implicit wait, what exception will you get? And the next set of interview questions are with respect to the locators. What are the locators in Selenium? Available locators. And when do we go for CSS selector? When do we go for ID? When do we go for name? When do we go for link text and partial link text locator? When do we go for XPath? What's the difference between CSS locator selector and XPath? What are the advantages of XPath? What's the difference between absolute and relative XPath? How will you handle if the web element is partially dynamic? How to write XPath in IE and Chrome browser? What do you know about XPath by access? Explain. What is your approach to find the location of web element if we do not have any attribute in the tag? How will you handle if the locator value is matching with multiple elements? Will locator value of the web element change from one browser to another? Can you justify? And the next set of interview questions are with respect to the pop-ups. How do you identify whether it is an alert pop-up or not? How do you handle it? Can I inspect alert pop-up? Is alert an interface or class? Explain the methods of it. How do you identify whether it is a hidden division pop-up or not? How do you handle it? How do you identify whether it is a notification pop-up or not? How do you handle it? How do you handle authentication pop-up? And how do you handle file upload pop-up? If alert pop-up as text field, how will you enter the value into the field? Can I inspect file upload pop-up? Can I handle file upload pop-up with the help of robot class? If yes, can you explain? How do you handle file download pop-up? How will you handle SSL pop-up in IE, Internet Explorer? How to handle file upload pop-up using auto IT? How to get text from alert pop-up? How will you identify if a drop-down is single select or multi-select? How do you handle drop-down? WebDriver driver equal to new Chrome driver. Select equal to new select of driver. Okay, is this true or false? Can you justify? And how do you handle if the drop-down options are dynamic? How will you handle the drop-down without using select class? How will you get all the options in the drop-down? How do you select only the alternative options from the drop-down? How will you get only selected options from the drop-down? Can you get all event indexed options from a drop-down? How will you get the first selected option from the drop-down? How will you check if the content in dropdown is not a duplicate? Why do we use get wrapped element method? What is the return type of get wrapped element method? What is the return type of select visible text, select by index, select by value method? What is the return type of get all selected options method? How do you deselect the selected option from the dropdown? And how do you deselect all the selected options from the dropdown? We have two dropdowns in a web page. How will you compare all the options of one dropdown with all the options of another dropdown? How to perform double click on the web element? Okay, so these are the interview questions from with respect to the actions class. Okay, let's get started. How to perform double click on the web element? How do you right click on the web page? How will you perform drag and drop action? How do you move the cursor to a specific element? Can I perform keyboard actions with the help of actions class? What is the difference between perform and build? What happens if I do not call perform method? Can you write a syntax to double click on web element using actions class? How will you perform keyboard actions? Can you write the syntax? How to work with frame window? How to work with nested frames? How to work with multiple frames of a web page? How many ways to work with the frames? How to work with frame when frame does not have ID and name attribute? How do you identify frame in a web page? What is the action of default content? What is the action of parent frame? And the next set of interview questions are with respect to the data driven. Okay, what is a data driven framework? Why do we go for Excel? What is POI or Apache POI? How do you get the data from the Excel sheet? Can you write the syntax? How do you set the data into the Excel sheet? Can you explain with the syntax? Is workbook factory an interface or a class? Why do we call create method? What is the function of file input stream object in data driven? And similarly, what is the function of file output stream object? What is the return type of create method? What is the return type of get sheet method, get row method and get cell method? Okay, and can you differentiate between get sheet and create sheet methods? Can you differentiate between string cell value and set string cell value? How do you set multiple data into Excel sheet dynamically? How do you get data from all columns of the last row in an Excel sheet? What are the jars or dependencies we need to add to get or set the data from Excel sheet? And the next set of interview questions are with respect to the TestNG. What is a TestNG? Why do we go for TestNG? Why do we call TestNG as a unit testing tool? What are the ways we have to install TestNG? How do you install TestNG? Explain with the steps. When do we get TestNG exception? Why? What are the uses of TestNG? Is TestNG an interface or a class? Can you explain the annotations of TestNG? Can you explain the order of execution of all the annotations? How do you perform group execution using TestNG? How do you perform batch execution using TestNG? And how do you perform controlled batch execution using TestNG? What do you mean by parallel execution? And what do you mean by thread count? Okay. And how do you perform parallel execution using TestNG? I have 200 test cases. What is your approach if I want to execute them parallelly in two different browsers? I have 200 test cases. What is your approach if I want to execute them parallelly in the same browsers? How do you run test cases at class level? How do you run test cases at package level? How do you run all the test cases at a project level? How do you run a single test case? Why do we go for data provider annotation? How do you perform cross-browser testing? How do you run the same test case multiple times? How will you create dependency between two test cases? How do you skip a test case? Is it possible to skip a test case without using enabled? How do you prioritize the test cases? Why do we need to prioritize the test case? How do you convert all the test cases into testng.xml file? And what is the use of testng.xml file? Can I create multiple testng.xml files? Can I create multiple testng.xml files with the same name? Can I run testng.xml file? Can I run multiple .xml files at the same time? What is the advantages of TestNG report? How do you execute only the failed test cases? What do you know about include and exclude? How do you configure testng.xml file to perform parallel execution? Can I run testng.xml file through command prompt? Why do we use log method? I will run 100 test cases but 10 got failed. How do you run only those failed test cases? What are the advantages of TestNG over JUnit? And the next set of interview questions are with respect to the page object model. What is page object model? Why do we go for page object model? Can you explain the rule of page object model class design? Why or when do we get stale element reference exception? How do you handle stale element reference exception? Is it possible to handle stale element reference exception without page object model class? What's the difference between find by and find element? And what's the difference between find by, find bys and find all? Why do we need to follow encapsulation rule to design page object model class? Why do we need to call init elements method only inside the constructor? And these are general interview questions. Okay. Why do we go for automation? What is automation testing? And can I automate hardware related test case? What is the prerequisite for automation? What is not automatable? What are the advantages and disadvantages of Selenium IDE and Selenium RC? What do you know about GitHub? And what do you know about Maven? And what do you know about Jenkins? Okay, guys, this is a comprehensive list of complete 207 interview questions. So you can expect majority of the questions from this list in the real-time interview with MNCs or startups or mid-sized companies. So I have given a link in the description and also in the comment section. So please do check out. I have uploaded this PDF and let me know if you have any queries or questions in the comment section or drop me an email. Okay, so thank you so much for watching my video. All the best for your upcoming interview. Stay tuned for more updates. Happy learning, happy testing.